Well, I'm the best corner in the game. What a run. Marshawn Lynch. Get off me.
DK. Yes, sir. Hey, it's John Schneider with Seattle Seahawks.
That's the result you won't get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Fighting. He's still moving. He's going to go down to the 20, the 15. They're chasing him 10. He's his right down the middle. Tyler Lockett has got it in the middle of the field. He's in the block. 25, 20, 15, 10, 5. How in the world did they do that?
This offense, just in general. I mean, you had a
To me,
guy
just
like
watching
that.
his film, he seems more of a back.
Just the presence he's got in that pocket, the way he throws the football. Rust days, man. All the scrutiny that line was under.
This Monday night's big.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Hawk Zone Rundown with Armac and B Rice. What's happening, man?
Not much, man. Just getting ready for this, coaching cycle of coaches and all the news coming out on who's getting interviews and
Yep.
watching some. This is probably one of the weirdest wild card rounds I can remember in recent history where it's just not been good.
No, you know what? The first game, the Saturday, just not good. Not good. I mean, the Dolphins, that was pathetic on their part. And, even if it's a frozen tundra, whatever they call it over there. But just, that was a sleeper. And then the game I did like, even though it was a blowout, was the Green Bay Dallas game. Because I've been a Jordan Love guy since last season, or when I first saw him, suit up for the Packers and got in there minimal time. And I was a believer of him, and didn't expect that. And then to put it on the boys like that, it's just another fail by the boys. And now you're looking at it like, I want to first of all sit here and give Green Bay some credit because they deserve it, right? And like you talked about, and we both talked about, they got a nice young receiving core. Jordan Love looks like he could be the future for a long time there, and they just got a nice youngest playoff win since the 70s.
Yep.
I got that correct? So
Yep.
the future's so bright there. You want to talk about bright futures, but what do you think? What's going on with the boys?
I think there's a couple of things with the boys. I think the boys are just the boys. This is what always happens. I think Jerry Jones has to step the fuck back a bit. And honestly, he's in that Al Davis round, man.
Yeah, but
honestly,
that won't change.
I know, but there's your problem.
Yeah.
What has been the
for
constant?
Sure.
It's been Jerry Jones until he literally somebody says to him, Jerry, you're senile. Get the fuck off the team and take your hands off of this and let someone else do it, whether it's his son or they bring somebody in and he just literally is an owner. You're going to have this problem. And basically, he is the playoff version of Al Davis. Al Davis struggled to get them to the Raiders playoffs. Jerry Jones can't get past the first round in the playoffs. And, for me with Green Bay, a couple things. Green Bay's the one franchise, and this goes back to Ron Wolf, man. We're talking early 90s when Favre got there. They do the best job at developing quarterbacks.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't pressure them in right away.
Right.
You look what happened with Bryce Young in Carolina.
Right. Thrown to the wolves.
But Jordan Love got to sit for 2.5, 3 years behind Rodgers.
A Hall of Famer.
Rodgers sat behind Favre for 3 years. And then if you go behind and look at Favre for his decade or plus that he was there, 20 years almost in Green Bay, you had Matt Hasselbeck behind him. You had Mark Brunell behind him. You had Aaron Brooks behind him, all who went off and became starters for 10 plus years in the NFL.
Right.
So that's the thing that I look at when, you talked about how much you like Love. I really did too. I just wasn't sure how it was going to look because of how that offense had functioned with Aaron doing Aaron things.
For sure.
But the big thing, like you said, the young receivers, and the thing that I think is really telling here is this, if Aaron had stayed, I don't think Green Bay's here. I think Green Bay's worse because
I agree.
The thing with structure is the structure helps the young receivers knowing when I do my breaks, the ball's going to be there because the quarterback's not going to ad lib and do something crazy or change something and do his own thing. Jordan's playing within the system, and man, honestly, they're going up against the Niners this week.
Yeah.
So,
but the one thing is too, when you talk about Aaron from day one of camp with all these young guys, I'm not exactly sure who was on the roster receiver wise, but just was putting ultra mega pressure on these guys. You're dropping a ball at practice, and it's here's Aaron and his ego ripping you apart, and that's the whole thing. Whereas now with Jordan, they can all sort of grow together, and that's the beautiful part of it. So, you got that core nucleus for years to come. And that's how I look at it. And I agree, they got the Niners is going to be super tough, but if it's any time to play the Niners for Green Bay, it's now when they're feeling good, rolling hot, knocking off Dallas at home. This, if any time's the right time to play the Niners, this is the time. And if you're feeling good and you're young and you don't know any better, good things can happen. So that's how I look at it. But hey, so here's a question for you though. Is McCarthy done? Is he finished in Dallas?
See, this is the knee-jerk reaction of everybody is, okay, we're gonna fire him now because they lost, and you look at Michael Irvin and all these Cowboys
Right.
super fans and crap, like that is not a desirable job. So you're gonna fire McCarthy. Who are you gonna go get? Bill Belichick?
Right.
Like, that's the only logical option. Like, you're not getting Jim Harbaugh down there to deal with Jerry Jones. You're not
No.
getting any of these other guys to deal with Jerry Jones. Because again, Jerry is the problem. So sure, you can fire Mike McCarthy, and that's probably going to be Mike McCarthy's last gig. He won't get another one as a head coach. He'll have to be a coordinator or whatever going forward. But what is your option? And this is kind of like ties into a lot of these firings, especially the surprises like Pete, for example, and with us, Mike Vrabel down in Tennessee. Like, what is your plan? What is your succession
Well,
plan look like?
you know what? Who can maybe chime in on this because we got Steezy A waiting to come in here and
Oh,
jump
here he
in. So
comes.
let's bring Steezy in and maybe he can expand on some of that. But we're gonna really dive into the Hawks too. So let's get him in. Hey guys, we got Calvin Domingo joining us, aka Steezy A Smith, to the show, man. How you doing? Oh, right on, for sure.
All right, man. So obviously last time we had you on here, we had the before training camp or just the start of training camp, kind of, preseason expectations and all that good stuff. So did we misjudge this team? Did we expect too much? Or when we went in and we were talking about it, like, were we accurate with based on what we had seen the year before to when we got into training camp? Were we kind of like on the right path of where this team should have been?
I think so. And obviously, in retrospect, it's a little harder to say that. But I do think that, in the last 4 or 5 years, I understand that, yeah, we traded Russell Wilson in that time span. And some people are saying, like, oh, we're in a quasi rebuild. But management has said themselves that, no, this is not a rebuild. This is a retool. And in some of the moves that Seattle has made, particularly trading a second round pick for Leonard Williams, signing Geno Smith to that contract, bringing back a Bobby Wagner. These are moves that win now teams make. And so when I look at it from that perspective, this team has been trying to win games. And Bryce, like you said, Seattle was just in the playoffs last year. But this year, it's like the team took a bunch of steps backward. And when you have a team as young as the Seahawks, you expect teams like that to move forward, because when you're not moving forward, you're moving backward. And I just think that at the end of it all, and we'll touch on this later, I think it has a lot to do with the coaching staff, and how they've kind of mismanaged things. I don't want to pin all the blame on Pete Carroll, but I don't think our expectations were too high. I mean, it's not like any of us are saying, oh, this team is going to the Super Bowl, this team is going to the NFC Championship. All we expected was a return to the playoffs and some improvements on the defensive side of the ball. Both those things we did not get.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely touch on definitely gonna be some coaching questions coming up in a few. But touching on, like you said, you traded a second round, you brought in Leonard Williams. Obviously, that's a win now move. And at the time, I think we were 6-3, first in the division, or at least tied for first in the division. And it was looking like kind of going as planned, right? Going head to head with the Niners. We were the two top teams, us and San Francisco. So what do you think contributed? I mean, maybe not, you can't pinpoint one thing, but contribute to that poor defensive play for majority of the year, that we cleaned house on the most of the defensive line, brought in some big money guys, Draymond Jones, and traded for Leonard Williams. And again, when you look at the statistics, almost exactly where we finished last year, almost dead last in the run, and super deflating. What do you attribute the most to that?
There's a plethora of factors, I'll say that. But to answer the question, you're asking what attributed the most. I think a lot of people are overlooking just how good, scratch that, how great Uchenna and Nwosu is, because literally the collapse started to happen after Uchenna and Nwosu was announced out for the season. Guys just weren't disciplined, when it came to stopping the run, controlling their gaps, controlling the edge. And guys just started, I feel like, playing out of place. And so I know we did bring in a Frank Clark, who we ended up releasing, a couple months later. But I do think that with the Uchenna and Nwosu, a lot of people are overlooking just how great of a player he is, especially in this system. And so I think I'd attribute it to that, the fact that he wasn't there and everything started to fall apart after that.
So with this defense we're talking about and like their collapse, and like you were just saying, like guys started to play out of position. They didn't seem to be following the scheme. What's your take on Reek, man? Like he looked soft this year, and I know he was coming off the knee injury and stuff, but like and the shoulder and whatnot, but like he looked soft, no effort at times. Especially for me, the big play was when the pile got pushed in the Steelers game and he's there, and then all of a sudden he just bounces his way back out of it. Like he's not even sticking his nose in. Do you want to see more aggression from like the D as a whole, like what Witherspoon brings, or do you have room on this D for guys to kind of just be quote unquote like a ball hawk, even though Tariq wasn't even that this year?
Man, that's a great question. I'm friends, with Tariq Woolen, so I got to be careful with what I'm saying here.
Okay.
I do think that there's room, to have a guy that could be elite, in coverage, but isn't necessarily elite in the physical aspect of the game, right? I do think that there's room for that, just because so many of these other guys, it's their job to be able to step it up as far as securing the tackle, and being physical and being an enforcer. And it's not every day you look to your cornerbacks to fill that role. And so because we do have a cornerback in the Devin Witherspoon, because there are safeties like Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, Julian Love, Bobby Wagner, Jordan Brooks, these guys are all physical. They all play a physical brand of football. They all bring that, the fact that they're able to enforce, I think they all bring that to the table. And so I think, to answer a part of your question, yes, there is room. But for Arik, I do think that by bringing in a new coaching staff, fresh faces, a guy that's going to hold these guys accountable,
Yeah.
I think that with Pete Carroll, I'm not going to sit here and say that, it's his fault that DK is able to get away with all these temper tantrums. I'm not going to say it's all his fault that Reek Woolen and the rest of these guys are missing tackles, but I do think that because he is the head of the snake, he's allowing a lot of these things to slide. And I think by bringing in a new coaching staff, some young, fresh faces, these next or the next coaching staff, they're not going to let stuff like that slide. And so I think next year we're going to see a more improved version of Reek. I know that he's going to hit the weight room. I know that he's definitely going to look back on what went wrong this year, and I know he's going to improve on that.
Yeah, that's a good point when you touched on Pete letting things slide. Like that was his whole thing when the Legion of Boom was happening, and we all loved it. But they were winning, and they were so much better than you. So it was like that's Pete's things. He lets guys get away with things. It's that fine line of being a little, undisciplined at times. But hey, if we're winning games, we'll take penalties. We can be the most penalized team in the league. We can tell you what defense we're running because we're just so much better than you. So that doesn't get exposed, like you're saying. So now when you see because we got talent on the squad, like don't get us wrong, like we love Reek's talent. The guy's 4'2", 40. I mean, he's got all the tools, but obviously there's some coaching that needs to be done there to bring him to the next level. And like you said, just even whether it's just being that a little more aggressive here or physical here or whatever it takes. So I agree with you on that. So sticking with the D, I mean, maybe overall, but a lot of guys on the D, because the offense seems pretty stable for the most part. Who do you definitely see us not bringing back from the defense? And then maybe since now, it's John's show, just straight up John's show. So who do you see us not bringing back? And do you see any maybe surprises that, if you're John Schneider, that come out of left field just because now, he's not going through Pete or nothing like that he might make?
Ooh, that's a great question. As much as I want to say Leonard Williams, because I don't think that Seattle's in any real position to be giving him the sort of money that he would command, I can't go there because
Right.
the defensive line is such a liability right now that you can't afford to just let him go and
Yeah.
get back a compensatory pick. And so I'm not tripping too hard about that. A lot of people, when Seattle made that move, they were like, oh my gosh, we wasted a second round pick for a rental. Well, even if he were to leave, we'd get a compensatory pick in return. And whether that's a third or a fourth, we essentially traded a second to go down and half the season of Leo. But I think we've kind of left ourselves stuck. Like the defensive line still isn't good. And we can't just turn to the draft and expect, that to fortify the defensive line. And so I think we're kind of stuck with Leonard Williams, which is not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Right.
So as far as departures, man, gotta say Jamal Adams. I know Seattle restructured his contract last year, and so usually and typically when you restructure contracts, you're essentially kicking the can down the road. And so because we restructured his contract last year, now the cap hit or the dead cap hit is going to be even higher. But if we were to designate it as a post June 1st cut, that's definitely going to help things as far as the savings. I just think that with Jamal Adams, I mean, as much as I love him as a player, this year kind of just it was the last straw for me.
Right.
I'm not even going to get into that whole spat that he got into with the reporter and his wife. I'm not even going to get into what happened with him and the concussion doctor, but just his play on the field. I mean, Seattle just doesn't even use him as it pertains to getting after the quarterback anymore. He's over here missing tackles himself. He's still not the best in coverage, and so I think he's probably going to have to go. Quandre Diggs too. I mean, he's. I'm not saying that he's on the decline. I'm not saying that he's no longer an above average safety, but I just think when we're looking at the money that is being allocated to Quandre Diggs, there's already another Pro Bowl safety in a Julian Love. And I just think that we're better off looking towards the draft, as far as bringing in a replacement as safety. And it's really just as far as cutting costs. Like, I don't think his play has declined that much, but Seattle needs to make a few moves to be able to create some cap space. And if Seattle's going to bring back a Leonard Williams, I think a guy like Quandre Diggs has to go. And the Jamal Adams, I just don't see him on this roster next year either.
So I kind of agree with you on that there, Calvin, because I look at the thing for me, like you said, there was all that other stuff in the media with, Jamal and the concussion. The one that bothered me the most was the Philly game where he got scratched and then didn't stay around to support the team and left and went home. Now, my understanding, and I've got guys that have played pro ball, like you don't, and you listen to even KJ, you do not miss being on the sideline unless you're sick and going to get other people sick. Wow. You're there supporting. Like I remember Earl, broken leg and all in crutches, showing up to the field and being there to support the guys. So for me, that was kind of like my last straw where it was like, okay, I get, you've got some shit going on you need to figure out. But then when you basically kind of flip the bird to the team and like, I'm more important than you guys, I'm going to go do my own thing. You got to go. Value in money cap space. I agree. For me, the reason I'd like to see Quandre go, and again, not decline, but just mediocre. He didn't fill the run very well. Like I remember like Earl would fly down there and get his nose in. Like there were a couple times this year where I looked at Quandre and he like ran to the outside of like a run going in the middle. It's like, dude, you got to fill, like you got to come down. You're the last line. I'd like to see Jarek Reed, who got hurt this year, possibly get a shot. Or the guy that everyone seems to have forgot of in our secondary, Kobe Bryant. They moved him to safety.
They did.
And he got hurt and then disappeared. But in the preseason, Kobe looked pretty good stepping into those roles and playing that. And we had Lofa Tatupu on one of our podcasts, and he even said, like, Kobe's smart. Like, he would be a perfect free safety because it's not what Seattle, and like you said, new staff comes in. There may not be single high. It may be Julian and another guy playing two high together. You don't have a true free and strong. Let Kobe go back there and play and see if he's got the ability to play safety.
I'd like that.
So speaking of the draft and stuff like that, obviously, we had a pretty successful season at UW this year. So with the 16th pick in the draft, if he so happens to fall there, do you think John finally goes and gets a quarterback like a Michael Penix, or if somehow Bo Nix or Jaden Daniels there, or do you think it'd be more of a day two kind of pick for John, like when he got Russell in the third round?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think it's going to be more of like a day two type of scenario in which I think John Schneider pulls the trigger on a quarterback, unless the Jaden Daniels is there. And I don't think this is going to happen, but if somehow, some way, like Drake May, there's a slide there. I think those are the guys that I think Seattle would be willing to take at 16th overall. I like Michael Penix. I don't think he's going to be a superstar in this league. I don't think that he's going to be a franchise quarterback. I do think that he can be an above average starter, but I think Seattle already has an above average starter in a Geno Smith. And this is just me personally, but if I'm running a front office and I'm going to spend a first round pick on a quarterback, I'd want more upside. And with the Michael Penix, I understand he did get injured, roughed up, banged up in the national championship, but I just didn't see that fire. I didn't see that dog. I didn't see that will in him. And while I do think that he can be successful, he can succeed with the weapons that are already in place in Seattle. Again, I just didn't see that fire of that dog. And I don't think the ceiling is immense enough where Seattle's like, yo, we got to take him at 16th overall. I just don't see it. And so, again, unless the Jaden Daniels or Drake May slides, I think Seattle's kind of out of the running for a quarterback in the first round. I think they prefer to wait until day 2.
Yeah, okay. So just following up on that. So do you think then they still take a quarterback somewhere in the draft and then Geno's back? And because Bryce and I love the idea of sitting behind a guy for a year or two. Like, I love that idea. I mean, look, you obviously watched the Packers and the boys yesterday. Like, there's an example. And Bryce, I talk about Jordan Love because when I saw him come in last year, just for that stint, and he hooked up with a few times with Christian Watson, and just he looks smooth. And I said, you know what, Green Bay's made their decision. Like, Aaron's done, and this is the future. And he got to sit behind a Hall of Famer for a couple of 2 seasons at least. And he didn't get thrown to the wolves. And if Jordan Love gets thrown to the wolves, it could be a totally different situation for him, right? And I think that's too many guys that happens to. Now, when Russell came in here, they just liked him so much, and he just blew them away at camp that, they had Matt Flynn. So the plan was probably to sit for a bit, but he just did so well at camp that we got to start this guy, right? So do you see them, do you see a situation where with the new staff, whoever that is, Geno's back, and they draft a young guy still, and he sits for a year, Geno's the starter? Is that kind of a scenario you might see?
I'd have to say so. I do think that I don't think Geno Smith is a lock, though, because I will say this. I did some research on his contract, and what I have over here is that $12.7 million is fully guaranteed on the 5th day after the Super Bowl. And so that day would be February 16th. I think that's a deadline for us to all kind of look at and use as far as like, yo, is he going to be on the team? Is he coming back? Because only $27.3 million of his salary is fully guaranteed at signing. A lot of the numbers, a lot of the money that was baked in were incentive based. And some of those incentives were making the playoffs this past year, which he didn't do. And performance based. And some of those things he wasn't able to accomplish because he did miss some time. And so I don't think, I just want to preface all this by saying that I don't think Geno Smith is a lock, just because I don't know if the coaching staff is going to be in love with the Geno Smith. He's a Pete Carroll guy, right? And so I do just want to get that out of the way. But assuming that we are going to run it back with Geno just for one more year, and then we bring in like a rookie quarterback, I think you're spot on, Ryan. I do think that, Seattle would love to have a guy develop behind a Geno Smith, just because I still think he's an above average starter. I mean, there's still a bunch of weapons, there's still a bunch of talent to work with. But I also think that if Seattle were to take like a Michael Penix, then Geno Smith isn't coming back, because when you look at Michael Penix's age, he's going to be 25 when next season starts. You're not going to bench a guy that's 25. I mean, he needs to get as many reps on the field as he possibly can, right? And so it's just, it all really depends on who Seattle takes. If we were to take like a Jaden Daniels, who I still think is a project, but the upside is immense, then the likelihood is a lot higher that, yeah, Jaden Daniels is going to sit for a year. Geno Smith is the guy. But assuming we move forward with Geno Smith, I'd have to say so, just because Drew Lock is a free agent. I don't know if he's going to start, or I don't know if he's going to stay.
Right.
I'll leave you with one name, Calvin, to watch if we're going to pick a guy in day 2. One guy that I fell in love with, Spencer Rattler.
Okay.
That's one guy that I got, because Quinn Ewers I thought maybe is a John guy. I think Rattler's going to be a John guy, just because you can get him on day 2. He's not going to go in the top first. He's not. But like you said, he has that potential. He can sit for a year. He's only 23, but he's kind of gone through the ringer, going from Oklahoma, having attitude issues and everything, to then going to Southern Carolina. Yeah. And turning it up down there, setting a bunch of records, playing in a pro style offense, which is a big selling point with Russell. When John looked at Russell, was he was coming out of a pro style offense. But just so like we can kind of go and kind of move along here and get to the meat more of this show today. Now that Pete is no longer the head coach, again, everyone, has their feelings about it. Who do you want to come in that makes the most sense for the specific group of guys that we're seeing them tagged with? So I'll give you some names. Obviously, they released a couple of them today. So they're interviewing Frank Smith, who's the OC in Miami, Dan Quinn. I think it's Idro Evro, the DC from Carolina, Raheem Morris, the DC in LA, Mike Kafka, who's the OC for the Giants, and then they just added Patrick Graham, the DC from Vegas.
I'm gonna be honest. I'm not very enamored with the
Any of them?
names. But it's not to say that they're bad candidates. I mean, when you look at some of the units that these guys coached up, I mean, the Raiders defense, yeah, they started to turn it up down the stretch, but I don't know about that. The Panthers, yeah, their defense was kind of the saving grace, but I don't know about that. Raheem Morris, I mean, I say this respectfully, as respectful as I can. He's just a retread, right? And we've seen him in the NFL before. Yes, while he's definitely gaining experience, I'm not in favor of going that route. Frank Smith, offensive coordinator for the Dolphins. Isn't it Mike McDaniel that calls plays in Miami?
Yep.
I mean, I don't know how much, of an impact Frank Smith has had, and that's not a knock on him. It's just, it's really about the genes of a Mike McDaniel. But some of the guys that I'd want in Seattle, I'd want like a Mike McDonald. I think
that's my number one guy too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you look at what he did to San Francisco, right? Like, how many guys in the NFL, how many defensive coordinators, how many coaches are doing that to that San Francisco 49ers offense? Like, they're going to fluster them, right? And when you look at the fact that the Rams also in the division, we have all these offensive powerhouses. Like, that defense, the talent is already there. Like, we need a guy that's going to be able to mold these guys and help them take that next step forward. And so I think Mike McDonald is definitely on my wish list. Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator for the Houston Texans. He comes from that Shanahan tree. He worked alongside Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, Matt LaFleur, Mike McDaniel in Washington with that coaching staff. And you guys are well aware of that. And so I think those are some of my top guys. Dan Quinn, I wouldn't be mad at. He's probably third or fourth on my wish list. But top two, I'd have to say Mike McDonald and Bobby Slowick.
So here's something that I was thinking about the other day with this and going back and forth, because I really like Mike McDaniel and I really like Bobby Slowick.
Right.
You almost, when you hire a defensive guy, so we hired Mike McDonald, sorry, you have to theoretically hire three positions, because you're going to have to nail your OC hire initially. And then you're going to have to make the hire of the next OC when your guy leaves that year to get a head coaching job somewhere. So like, to take the DC guy, you're going to have to hire three more hires that are going to have to nail, where if you do like what, Shanahan and the Niners and McVay and the Rams, you get that offensive guy, which we have so many weapons now. Like, you're talking about our defense, our offense underperformed greatly with the weapons that we had. For me, the top of my list, like, I love Mike McDonald, but it's probably Bobby Slowick or Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson's probably the top of my list, because of, you look what he's done with that Lions offense with Jared Goff. So if we keep, Geno, he's worked with a established veteran. But the big thing for me is how he uses Montgomery and Gibbs, considering we have Charbonnet and Walker.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right.
So that's for me. And Bobby Slowick also has connections to John Schneider back in the day when Bobby's dad coached in Green Bay. John was there as a scout.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. So that's something to keep a tab on.
Fun fact.
Hey, so sticking with the coaches, like, actually what kind of Bryce touched on, I sort of want to bring that back, because I want to touch on this, because I know we spoke at training camp about how excited we were about this offense. Like, we were so high on JSN, which, you still should be high on JSN. The dude's an absolute baller, right? So, but then you also have Zach Charbonnet, and we thought, hey, you got a 1-2 punch, potential 1-2 punch at back. And it was like, pick your poison. I think that's what we were saying. And how Geno is going to just, even if he stays the same, how can you see a regression, right? So, people talk about offensive coach, defensive coach, but you also talk about, like you said, discipline coach. Like you want a bit of that mix. You can have an offensive coach and not a lot of discipline. Like Bryce talked about, we had Lofa on the show, and we asked him who did you prefer playing with, because you had the unique situation playing with both Mike and Pete, and he liked obviously both guys, but he preferred Mike because of that discipline aspect. He said we were such a disciplined team that he loved that structure, and that wasn't taking anything away from Pete, but it was just he could see that the discipline is what you need. Now, like I said, if you're the Legion of Boom, sure, you can get away with a lot of stuff. But if you're a team that not an average team, but you're a good team, that structure goes a long way, right? So that's what I want to see. And I tend to lean towards the offensive coach, but I just want to see somebody here that brings in discipline. So I guess tying it in, and agree. I think you just spoke. I was going to ask you about Dan Quinn, because I think it's more of a safe play, right? Like he's been in this culture before, so let's bring him in. But I don't want to see them go back. I want to see them, hey, let's turn the page. Like, let's get to the next chapter here. Like, we don't have to do the nostalgic reminiscing of Legion of Boom stuff. Like, that's just what I think. Because, the same thing with them kept talking about, hey, Devin Witherspoon, they're 2.0 Legion of Boom. Like, no, they're not, right? And so I guess my question would be, sort of tying in with the coaching and the offense. Did they mismanage that offense, like that coaching staff? So for example, I don't even know, because you had Shane Waldron in there, right? Like we assume they're all going to go, but did they mismanage that offense as a whole? Like especially with, like, we both think Zach was mismanaged. Like that's what we think. Like, so what's your take on that? And with the offense, was the offense mismanaged for the whole year? Receivers, backs, and are you really leaning towards an offensive coach with that discipline mix?
Great questions. Just real quick, I want to piggyback off what I was saying. I forgot to include Jim Harbaugh. I'm actually a big fan of Jim Harbaugh, and I think he brings the best of both worlds. He's not typically known as like a offensive guy, defensive guy. He's really like the guy, right? And everywhere he goes, he wins. And I don't know, let's say Jody Allen sells the team in the next 3, 4, 5 years. I know a lot of people talk about, everywhere Jim Harbaugh goes, he wins, but the shelf life is typically 3, 4, 5 years. Well, that kind of aligns with the timeline, right? If Jody Allen will sell the team. And so maybe you bring in the Jim Harbaugh, make this team relevant again, reach a Super Bowl or 2 within the next 3 or 4 years, and then you're riding high, and then you sell the team. I don't know if I'm Jody Allen. That's something I'm kind of looking at. And then real quick, just Eric Bieniemy. I think if we were to bring in a guy like a Mike McDonald, maybe he brings in like an Eric Bieniemy as offensive coordinator, give him one more chance to kind of work with, an elite skill position group. Just wanted to get those things out of the way. But
no, I like that.
To answer your questions, Ryan, I think I think it's obvious. The offense was 110% mismanaged. I mean, I wanted to host a show about this earlier in the year, but I kind of compared DK Metcalf to like a Ferrari. Like the Seahawks have a Ferrari and a DK Metcalf, but then when they drive it, they only want to go 30, 40 miles an hour. Like they're never really going. You can go 100, 110 in a Ferrari, right? In the DK Metcalf, you could do that, but there were a countless number of games this year in which he went 2, 3 quarters with 0 targets. And then it's like in the fourth quarter when we're down, then we're peppering with 3 to 4 targets. And so DK Metcalf was totally mismanaged.
Yeah.
Zach Charbonnet, Seattle spent a second-round pick just not to use him? I mean, the only times we really saw him in action was when Ken Walker was missing time or when Ken Walker was injured. And so if that was going to be the case, Seattle would have been better off using that second-round pick on an interior lineman or another position on defense. And so there's that. You spent a high level of capital on a guy you barely even used. JSN, I understand he came into the year injured, but he really wasn't being used either until kind of like the second half of the year. That's when Seattle started using. Tyler Lockett was being phased out of games from time to time. There's just a plethora of reasons. No offense. I mean, he's disappeared. There were a number of games in which he just disappeared. And so I'd have to say, I mean, Seattle mismanaged a bunch of guys. And it was just a mess.
Well, no identity is the key word, I would say. Like there was like you went in week to week not knowing what the hell they were going to do. Like, what's the game plan today, Shane and Pete? And ultimately, it's Pete's team, but and it's like that's what really kind of frustrated us, was like you didn't even know It's like, okay, your whole thing is run the ball. You got back-to-back second-round picks at running back, and you don't know how to use it. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, let's, I guess, stick with that coaching thing because that sort of ties in with the coaching, right? I mean, the thing is with Pete, we were saying, okay, if he stayed, Shane has to go, Clint has to go. Now you're looking at everyone probably going. So man, I guess how I'm looking at it, what are we gonna do move forward? Like, what are we doing moving forward with how you want to see the identity of this offense? Like you mentioned DK, right? Like I every week I praise the guy. I'm like, this guy could be the best receiver in the freaking league. And he just doesn't. So where do you see that they can come in, like the next coach, and like put the proper plan together? Like what has to be done so this offense is what we thought it was going to be at the beginning of training camp?
Man, another great question. I think for one, we got to get guys. I mean, going back to what you said, Ryan, I think we kind of had to agree on like on an identity, on a philosophy. I think that if the guys were to kind of come together and kind of buy into this, this is the sort of football team that we want to be, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'm gonna need everybody to buy in, and if you can't, then we can get you out of here, right? And so I think that's the number one thing. Seattle has to find an identity. Because if we're gonna fully, close the chapter on the Pete Carroll thing, yeah, we could take a few pages out of his book, and if we still want to run the football and whatnot, we could do that. But I think it's very important that we establish an identity, we get guys to buy in. If not, get them out of here, and then two, really start to cater to the guys that we have on offense. I mean, when you have three elite skill position players at pass catcher, at wide receiver, I think that you kind of want to run an offense conducive to the weapons and to the guys that you have. And so I want to see more up tempo. I want to see more pre-snap movement. I want to see more innovativeness. And we have the talent to do that. And so I think some of the things that the next coaching staff has to focus on, again, establish an identity, get guys to buy in, and really start to implement some of these things that's going to help cater to what we have.
So I got something for you here, Calvin, just to kind of figure it out. So overall, were you a fan of the Pete move? Like, did you think it was actually time? Me and Ryan both felt it was time. Like, you could just, this year felt to me the closest resemblance of this year's Seahawks team felt like 09 with Jim Mora. Like the cigar thing in the locker room. And I know there's a whole bunch of controversy over what the hell that whole thing was. That's one. The other one for me is, just some of the antics and stuff of the guys, throughout the year and stuff like that. But like, do you think ultimately the Hawks will regret this decision? Say they hire a guy, it doesn't work out, and then they're in we're looking for our next coach in 2 years or 3 years. Do you think that'll ultimately make people go back and go, oh, we should have kept Pete for that 2-year period or 1-year period?
If that were to happen, then yeah, people are absolutely going to feel that way. But at the same time, in this day and age, a lot of people kind of like to operate with a short-sighted mindset, right? Like when something doesn't go right the first time or something takes a long time to develop, it's like, damn, like, what are we doing wrong? Or like, what's the problem? But I think people are kind of lost in the fact that, patience is still, very much a virtue. And I think patience is very much a thing that people have kind of forgotten about. Great things take time. And for me, it's like, okay, let's say Seattle misses the playoffs again next year. I'm fine with that. And I'm not going to panic and say, oh my gosh, like we shouldn't have fired Pete Carroll. Because with Pete Carroll, going back to the original question, yes, it was time. And I was even clamoring for this years ago. Like the defense has gotten worse every year. Tackling has gotten worse every year. Penalties are still up every single year. And there's just been a lot of things that have gone wrong. And I'm a big quote guy. And so one of the quotes that I kind of used in one of these videos that I dropped was, quote, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a villain.
I've used that like 4 times in this situation, man, on our podcast. That's my favorite go-to quote for this.
Right. And a lot of people don't understand it, but I'm glad you guys do. And it's like with Pete, yeah, he's a legend. Yeah, he'll forever be loved, for what he did in the city of Seattle. But when you look at the last decade, I mean, what is it? One playoff victory? I mean, in the last 7 years?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the standard, the bar has been set so high that what we've been seeing in the last 7, 8 years, it's mediocre, to Seattle standards, and so it's like that stuff is not going to fly by. And going back to what I was saying earlier, I'm not mad if a team or if whoever we bring in that head coach, we don't make the playoffs next year, as long as I see improvements. Because
Right.
with the last 7 to 8 years, there has not been any sort of improvement on the
No.
defensive side of the ball whatsoever. Like you guys said at the top of the show, we've had a major overhaul as far as the personnel department. We brought in a Draymond Jones. We've never spent that much money in free agency, but we brought in a Draymond Jones. We brought back our Bobby Wagner. We drafted a Devin Witherspoon. We got a gem in the Tariq Woolen. Julian Love was a gem of a free agent signing. Jordan Brooks had a revelation of a year. Like there's so much talent, but then the team is going backwards defensively. And so as long as I see improvements from the next coaching staff, I'm fine with not making the playoffs. But to kind of tie it all up for what we were saying with Pete, all good things must come to an end. And I just think with Pete, I mean, it had kind of run its course. And even though he was still helping us put up winning seasons, it just never really felt like Seattle was in Super Bowl contention. And it's felt that way since like 2015, 2016, to be honest.
So we had a guy on our last pod, Seahawks nerd. He's a newer guy to the analytic world but he made a really good analogy, which me and Ryan both liked. He said the last decade, like you were saying, is like being stuck in a car in mud and you keep hitting the pedal harder and harder to get out. And you just keep going farther backwards and backwards. And eventually you just have to abandon the car and leave it there.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, that's a
Wow.
pretty strong analogy for what Seattle's been doing. Like the abandoning the car is moving on from Pete rather than still pumping yourself and pressing on that pedal to get out. You're just not going to get out of this situation. And so, with that said, how do you view the next 3 years going with JS, John Schneider, obviously running the show now in complete control of everything? Do you think it depends on the hire if he takes this down to the studs, or do you think they push forward with what they currently have and try to rebuild or retool on the fly still?
I think you got to push forward with what we got and still continue to try to retool on the fly, per se, right? Just because, again, there's so much talent present on this football team. And I know Seattle doesn't have a second round pick this year, but Seattle does have two third round picks. And so you still have, assets in the cupboard. You still have, and you got to get creative, but you can create cap space, right? And so I think that, yeah, I mean, given the talent, given the trajectory of this team, if you were to bring in the right coaching staff, this team could easily find itself back in the playoffs next year. And then by year two, making serious noise. I mean, JSN is only going to continue to get better. K9, I mean, once fully healthy, I mean, he is one of the more talented backs in the league. Again, it all really comes down to the talent. Like, there's so much talent on this team. Like, it's kind of hard to see, this team not fulfilling expectations if Seattle were to bring in the right coaching staff.
Yeah, man. I mean, I agree with that 100%. Like, Bryce and I, we talked to a guy who covers the Arizona Cardinals before they played the Cardinals, and that was an example of that fan base getting excited with Gannon down there and their whole new culture. And they don't have nearly the talent we have up here, but and of course, what 5 win season. But the point is, they're excited for the future. They see that trajectory of this team that, hey, looks like with Gannon, Kyler's their guy now, so we can put all that to bed. We can start building through this draft because we believe in the GM, we believe in Gannon, and we are excited now. Before with Kingsbury, it was just a whole mess, And so,
Right.
like you said, Pete's a legend, but it's like sometimes, when legends are here, like guys who won Super Bowls, sometimes that leash is so long that it's hard to, unleash them and sort of say, it's time to go, sort of thing. And we got all love in the world for Pete, just like you do, right? But and you want to, at the end of the day, it's like, what's going to be the best for the Seattle Seahawks at the end of the day? So that's how I look at it. Like, I'm not so caught up in like, how many wins are we going to win next year? Like, it's like, if we win 6 wins, but you can see this team is just more disciplined. They're improving in all these different aspects. Because wins, whatever, like you said, it's a good thing we probably didn't make the playoffs this year. You know what I mean? So it's like, that's sort of where I think we're looking at it. Like, we just want to see a culture change and like it point in the right direction, sort of thing, right? So like, wins will take care of himself. That's how we look at it. So that's why now it's kind of exciting to sort of turn the page and get to the next chapter and kind of see what John does and does his thing here. But so kind of tying in with that with Jody Allen, like nobody had a clue what was going through her head since Paul passed away, right? And then she took over the team. This is your first real glimpse, like, okay, yeah, she actually is doing something about something because people thought maybe they'll just keep status quo until maybe she sells the team and she doesn't want to ruffle feathers. They actually made a significant move letting Pete go. So what's your take now on Jody as the owner moving forward? Do you kind of say this is a move where you're like, okay, maybe like it seems like she is in a lot of situations now, like she's there, she's present. Like, would you like to see her as the owner moving forward? Or would you like her to kind of dump this team? I mean, I know it's kind of a tough question, but just kind of based on the Pete move and sort of like she seems like she's vested in this team.
I think this is just all opinion. I haven't heard this from anybody, but deep down, I truly believe that she wants to get Paul, and I know he's obviously passed away, but like
Right.
she wants to get him a Super Bowl before she's to sell the team.
Yeah.
And so I think with her being involved, essentially firing a Pete Carroll, I think it's her showing us that, you know what, she's serious about winning. And maybe she did have thoughts about selling the team, but it's like, damn, my brother passed away and I wasn't able to win for him. And then when things got bad, like I just sold the team. Like I just feel like coming from the family that she comes from, that's not what they were taught. That's not how they move. That's not how they operate. And so it's like, okay, I still think she's intent on selling the team in the near future, but she's gonna leave on a high note, on a great note, and she's gonna dedicate that to her brother. And once that has been accomplished, then it's like, okay, you know what, I could sell the team. But as far as the way that things kind of stood in the last couple of years, like I said earlier, I just never really felt like Seattle was ever really in Super Bowl contention or even closing in or inching towards that. And so that's why Jody decided to pull the trigger. And this is going to be like a semi-rebuild / retool, give it 3 to 4 years. And that's why I think Jim Harbaugh would be a great candidate. I understand there's, been bad blood between him and Pete, but at the end of the day, if it means winning, you got to set stuff like that aside. And so I say all that to say that Jody wants to bring this team back to, to its previous heights. And then once it's, I guess in its highest of highs, then you sell the team from there.
So a couple things. One, the Buccaneers breaking news kicked the crap out of the Eagles, and that's over and done with. Second thing, Adam Schefter was on the Dan Patrick show and dropped an interesting little tidbit here in regards to Seattle. Apparently, Mike Vrabel and John Schneider are quite good friends.
I saw that.
Which to me is kind of interesting because usually when Schefter drops something like that, it's usually a prelude to something else coming down the pipe. I wouldn't be shocked if Mike Vrabel ends up being like the dark horse hire that we're all assume Dan Quinn's the defensive guy they'd go get. I actually don't mind Mike Vrabel because you talk about a culture change. He would shock the culture of Seattle and what he does. But speaking of the offseason and everything we've talked about so far, what in your mind, Calvin, would you consider a successful offseason? We'll take the coach hire job out of this right now because that's definitely going to happen. But like player acquisition, draft, how would you sum up for you what you think based on where this team's at would be a successful offseason going into next year with this whole new thing happening with the new coaching staff coming in?
Man, that's a dope question. I think and I'm glad you removed the whole coaching staff aspect out of it just because that'd be, that would have been too easy. I'd have to say having a plan in place at quarterback for the next 5 to 10 years. Just because, like we talked about earlier, there's a lot of money in Geno Smith's contract that's not guaranteed. And like I said, it's not even a guarantee that he's on his team next year. We'll see come the 5th day of the new league year. Drew Lock is a free agent. Don't know if he's coming back. He probably wants to start for another team. And if Seattle isn't willing to at least guarantee that or, give him a real shot, he's probably out of here. And so Seattle really doesn't have a quarterback. Like, and let's say 4 or 5 years from now, Seattle doesn't make any moves at quarterback. Seattle's not going to have any quarterbacks, 4 or 5 years from now. So I think the number one thing that'd be conducive in having a successful offseason is just having a plan in place at quarterback. I think once you have that, because once you have a coaching staff, you got to figure that part out. And like we talked about, time and time again, there's just a bunch of talent already, skill position, offensively, skill position plays on defense. Like there's a lot to work with already. And so number one will be figuring out the plan at quarterback. And then number two, really addressing and solidifying the offensive line, investing more capital in the offensive line, just because in the last, I don't know how long, we've seen minimal investment in the offensive line. And as we all know, football in the trenches, it's where you win football games. And Seattle just hasn't, beefed up especially the offensive line. I feel like enough to where you can succeed in this league. And so number one, obviously coaching staff, but number two is really having to plan at quarterback. And then number three is just really solidifying and investing more capital in the offensive line.
Right on. Yeah, man, we could touch online for a long time, but you know what, man, time's flying, dude. Like we've had you on for almost an hour here, so we're not going to keep you too much longer. But why don't it was awesome having you on. Just kind of talking.
Thanks for having me, y'all.
Preseason, now postseason, and it's kind of, you can almost do a kind of a cut of different clips that we did, kind of how excited we were. And you know what, the funny thing is that now there's, like I said, I say the next chapter, but there's something to kind of get excited about again. Like there's just so much unknown, and like you said, the talent is there. Like we don't have a bunch of scrubs hanging around the field. Like we got so much skill on this team, for real. We got so much skill, and it just might take a few tweaks here and some discipline here and a couple other pieces that, like you said, it might not be that much longer before we're back in the mix. Like we got good players. We do. And we will, and things change. So anyways, gonna get you out of here, but before we do that, why don't you let people know what you've been up to, and how they can find you, and on Instagram and in YouTube and all that good stuff.
Man, well, first and foremost, I had a pleasure, I had a blast, and as you know, time flies when you're having fun, and that's what I've been, I guess, experiencing, this past hour, just, having a bunch of fun, just chopping it up with you guys.
Yeah,
like I said,
sure.
I definitely want to bring you guys on my show here in the near future. But really just at Steezy A Smith, I mean, STEZYA SMITH, Instagram, YouTube. Like I said at the top of the show, I'm going to be hosting weekly live shows on my YouTube again. So definitely stay tuned and be on the lookout for that. And to the audience, to everybody that's tuned in, I mean, if you guys aren't subbed to my guys out here, you guys rebranded to the Hawk Zone, right?
Yeah.
The
Hawk Zone Rundown. Yep.
Hawk Zone Rundown. Before you even take a look at me and any of my stuff, definitely got to subscribe to them, give them a follow on all their social medias, and stay tapped in. I mean, they put out great work. They do a bunch of work, and so definitely can't miss out on that. And I'm real thankful again. And man, I had a bunch of fun. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome, man. Yeah, definitely check out Steezy A Smith stuff, guys. He's definitely putting out awesome content. So, man, appreciate you having you on, and we'll touch base again and chop it up in the near future here.
Man, much gratitude. Y'all have a great night.
All right, man. You too.
Calvin, see you, man.
That was Steezy A Smith hanging out with us, talking Hawks for man, we almost had him on for an hour, man. That went quick. But because again, like awesome takes by him, man. Just kind of breaking it down, and even the he's kind of down there on, I don't want to say, you could say the word like field level almost, knowing the guys like Reek and some of the guys right down there on a personal level. So it's kind of cool to kind of get that aspect from Steezy, you know what I mean? Just to kind of get that viewpoint.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to have Calvin on, man. Like he gives us a more kind of tapped in local vibe to what's going on with him. Like you said, he's close with Reek and stuff, but yeah, it's going to be an interesting off season, and it's great that we get these guys on because they all give us different perspectives on what they feel, what they're hearing, so on and so forth. But no, yeah, I thought his his comments about Michael Penix were interesting to me because everyone's so in love with Penix. I like Penix.
Yeah, you do.
But how he said like where he views Penix is an above average, starting quarterback, which is what we already have. And it's gotten me thinking like, and this has probably been the last week or so since the national championship and
Sure.
so on, but like Spencer Rattler is really a name I've been keeping an eye on and doing a lot of research in because I've started to think like, depending on which coaching staff we bring in, like if we bring in a Bobby Slowick or a Ben Johnson, like one of these offensive young-minded guys, they may say to John, I need one of these quarterbacks in the top. And we may trade up and we may go get Jaden Daniels or somebody like that, or Drake May. But I just keep looking back, like if we're still at 16 when the draft comes and that's where we're hanging out and Penix is there, I don't know if John pulls that trigger. If he doesn't go, hey, you know what? There's a wicked center or a wicked guard or something like that that's going to add to that interior of our line. And then like we have 2 third-round picks. There's a good chance Spencer Rattler will be hanging out in there and you could go grab him. And then you know what? Spencer sits a year and then he starts. Great. And like I know for a fact, Rob Staten's a big Spencer Rattler guy too.
Yeah, he is.
So like when we have him on, I'm really going to focus on chopping it up with Rob about Spencer.
Right.
But here's the other possibility. And like listening to Calvin and Steezy talk about it is what happens if we don't draft a quarterback, A, and B, Gino and Locke aren't on the roster either. And we go with somebody else. We go with,
Free agent.
I don't know, Jimmy G or Kirk Cousins coming out of, like there's a possibility that whoever we get could want to bring in somebody else that's not even on our roster. It's on some other roster because they've got familiarity there. The one thing I'm going to say, though, if we do hire a defensive guy, like Mike McDonald or Mike Vrabel or Dan Quinn, if it's Mike McDonald, the guy from Baltimore, and he's young, if I'm him and I need an offensive coordinator to come in right now and be the guy that I need to call my offense I can trust him with, I am calling Dave Canales in Tampa Bay.
Right. That
guy should never have been allowed out of the building because he left this year and look at what our offense did.
I know. So yeah, man, touching on that, that's an interesting, because we're in an interesting spot at 16. Like, and that's the thing, like the point he brings up about Penix, it's like if you're John Schneider, if you don't think he's going to be this franchise superstar, maybe superstar is a strong word, but definitely a franchise guy and way above Gino's ceiling, then do you take him? Like it also comes down to your gut. And if you don't see it, then like Steezy's saying, then it might be tough to give up a first round pick on him. And like you said, you go guard and you say, well, we're gonna kind of build this foundation around whatever quarterback's gonna be there. And then, like you said, maybe, and again, this is us trying to get into John Schneider's head, you like a Spencer Rattler and you take him in a day 2 or whatever, right? Like later rounds. So, and again, it's going to come down to whoever they hire as head coach, like you said. Like they're going to be sitting around in that room, and obviously it's John's decision, but there might be like, I need to work with somebody. But there's so many possibilities now. That's the thing with Pete gone, and you don't know who's going to be this coach. John's on his own. John could pull a wild card. Like you said, like that's an interesting point you bring up with a la Kirk Cousins, kind of a middle of the road free agent that, hey, you got some pieces around here. DK, JSN, Tyler, Zach, K9. We built the offensive line up slowly. You might go that route. But, that's interesting about Penix. I agree. And it's just one of those things. Like, I think if you're picking there, you have to love him. Or I think you got to pass. Because it's a crucial pick. It's still a first round pick. And knowing John too, who knows? Maybe he doesn't like anything there. And he trades it, right? And that we've seen that before.
Yeah. No,
so
100%.
that'll be interesting to see. Yeah, and as far as head coaches, and as far as the Pete thing, I think we're all in agreement there. Like and he was pushed for it. I know you and I have talked about, she could have been done earlier and this and that, but we obviously really thought this when we were pushing for it for the last 6-7 weeks on this show. So, yeah, it was surprising he was really pushing it for a long time, but it seems like we're all in agreement with that, right? So
Well, yeah, and it had to happen. The thing for me, so like I know a lot of people right now are talking about the performance of Dan Quinn's defense down in this last game down in Green Bay, and oh, it should take him out of the running, and he shouldn't be in, one game does not make a coordinator or coach. The one thing we have to be really conscious of, and this is something that I think gets kind of lost, is everyone wants, I'm guilty of it too, and I just realistically thought about it again. Your head coach is your culture, like you've alluded to, is your culture guy. Like he is in charge of everything in that building besides the general manager.
right.
And I'm more of the I'm more of the opponent of bringing somebody that's not Pete discipled in a way, like a Dan Quinn. Not because I think Dan Quinn's going to be exactly like Pete, not in the slightest. But if you're going to have culture, you still have a culture piece there. And this is what everyone keeps forgetting. John Schneider's still in that building. John Schneider's been there for 14 years.
Yeah.
Gone through the Pete masterclass and that whole thing. I just don't see him wanting to bring in like if you're gonna bring in Dan Quinn, you might as well have kept Pete. Like if that's what you're bringing in, like that's the argument I see to it, and I kind of agree with it. Like if you were gonna bring in Dan, then just keep Pete till the end of his contract,
right?
And go like it doesn't make sense. Like to me, if you're gonna stay defense, Mike McDonald seems to be like the guy that I would go after. Like I'm looking at the list of guys that Rob Staten put out on his blog, which by the way, everyone, Seahawks Jack blog, follow that. It is a great source. Like Frank Smith, who's the OC down in Miami. He's not really the OC. Mike McDaniel is. It's no different than Shanahan and McVay.
Right.
They call the plays. He has his input, but it's not crazy. Dan Quinn, the DC out of Carolina, Raheem Morris. Mike Kafka to me is an interesting one. And this is why Mike Kafka is interesting to me. Recently out of the league, he was a quarterback in the NFL for Andy Reid. He was there as the QB coach when Mahomes got drafted and helped develop Patrick Mahomes. Then he gets poached and goes to the Giants with Daboll. Again, and this is something people have to remember. And like people always go, oh, he's, is he a great public speaker? Can he do this? Can he do that? Andy Reid was never a coordinator before he took the Philly job. He was a quarterback coach. Right? So like you got to look at this. Like your coordinator does not necessarily mean head coach quality. Like
no, not at all.
Like you look at John Harbaugh, special teams coach. He was an offense, and he's been in Baltimore now for however long. So
I think there's too much emphasis on that sometimes.
100%.
Too much.
100%.
Because you're a leader. You are the guy. You have to be. Some guys can call plays left, right, and center. Doesn't mean they can now all of a sudden they can lead a bunch of men.
100%. And that's why, like, if I looked at, like, if you had to say between Dan Quinn and Mike Vrabel, who would I rather have? I'd rather have Mike Vrabel. Completely culture shock.
Yeah.
Comes in, he's going to bring that intensity. He would fix the defense. I know that because Tennessee has still had a good defense over these years.
What's your take on Jim Harbaugh? He seems to be pushing for it. He likes it. I mean, Jim, he obviously
here's my thing with Jim Harbaugh, and this is why I don't think it works here. And I think Jim's a good coach. Like besides the Huskies, I'm a Michigan Wolverine fan. Like I've loved what they've done for years in Michigan and their type of football. This is the thing for me with Jim. And I look at it very much. Jim's coming back to the NFL. So he was in the NFL, he was in college, in the NFL, back to college, successful in college, really successful this time around. Now looking at coming back. Who does that remind you of? Pete Carroll. Pete did the exact same thing. When Pete came back from from USC at the time, where he was essentially a god at the time in the college, he was the coach. He got run out because of all the scandal with playing players, which now the NIL is anyways. That's another story.
Just watch that 30 for 30, actually.
Exactly. And so, but what did Pete get when he came to Seattle? He got full control. He got VP.
Right.
There's no way Jim Harbaugh is going to come into the NFL and not have full control. He may have a GM, but he's going to be like Pete and want control.
Yeah, you're right.
Do you really think John Schneider wants to give that up after he's just waited 14 years? Regardless if he's got a good relationship with the guy or not, I just don't see John. This is John's chance. Like John theoretically has a 3-year window here to prove that it wasn't all Pete.
Right.
That's what this 3-year window is, because His contract only runs through the 2027 draft and he's done, right? Unless they re-up him or whatever. So John right now is viewed as a top 5, top 3 GM in the NFL. But if he doesn't do it now without Pete, does he still carry that weight if he goes to look for another job?
It's
And
yeah,
that's
that
what I think for him. He wants to nail this hire, have it
yeah.
be his guy, do it again. And if he wins a Super Bowl on his own, then you can ultimately say John Schneider is one of the top GMs to ever be in the NFL because he did it with Pete and then he did it on his own.
Don's like, yeah, and I
What if it
agree.
did Belichick and Brady when they split?
Sure.
Brady had to go and win one to prove he didn't need Belichick.
Yeah, and that's a good point with Jim because and not even what John wants at the end of the day. It's like as a Seattle fan base, you want that again. Like I don't like that. Like your head coach has all this control. And the only reason why you kind of put up with it, like I said, because you had the early success.
Mm-hmm.
You came in, Pete came in, he had the even the 7 and 9 year, man. Beastquake was born and we knocked off the champions. And it's sort of built, you had the young core. I think Earl was on the team, rookie or
Mm-hmm.
something. So you sort of were starting that culture. And that's when stuff resonated with Pete. Like I remember when watching clips of him after that win and he was jacked up and all this kind of stuff and you were buying into it. And like you said, you fast forward and you know, things get old and all this kind of stuff. But again, he had so much control. He's not just your head coach and like, how do you get rid of him? You know, so it was like, and if he was just a regular, just not didn't have that power, it would have been a little different. Maybe he wouldn't be here as long, kind of thing, right? With John.
Well, exactly. I honestly think, and this is my opinion, I have no obviously sources in this regard, but if Paul Allen hadn't passed away,
Right,
I think Pete Carroll is fired after the 2020 season
right. Yeah,
because they
no,
blew it
for
in the
sure.
wild card, going 12-4. They lost it. And I get there was COVID and I get there was this, but it was okay. This is our next 3 guys because they had just brought in Ken Norton and Shoddy and all this after he had fired him in 2000. And that was the thing is once Paul passed away, Jody, as much like this is Jody's first big move. Let's be
Oh yeah,
realistic here.
first big
This
move.
is her first big power move as owner with Vulcan Entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
as owner of the Seattle Seahawks.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Allen had made numerous moves prior to that. He's the one that got Mike Holmgren. He ultimately is the one that fired and pushed Mike Holmgren into retirement and wouldn't bring him back.
Right,
He fired Jim Moore after 1 year.
right.
Paul wasn't afraid to fire people and get rid of them if it wasn't what he wanted. And so that's where I look at this whole thing. I go, I don't know if Pete's here, if Paul's still around. I think
Right.
Pete gets fired and gets shipped out and said, adios, thanks for everything. We're rebooting this and doing it my way, and we're going to bring in somebody else. And you look at the power structure. So Mike Holmgren, when he initially got hired in Seattle, had the same power structure as Pete, and then they took it away from him.
Right.
Once they took it away from him and brought in a GM that ran the show player-wise, Lofa Tatupu gets drafted. They go to their Super Bowl. They start having a little bit more success. It's too much for a coach to do both.
It is.
And that's where like some guys can have that immediate success for like 3 to 4 years. Like when Jim Harbaugh comes back into the NFL this year, which I'm almost certain he's going to, because I look at 2 players right now that just declared from Michigan, which is JJ McCarthy and Blake Corum. Both of them had the option to go back another year and they both bolted the NFL. That's a pretty good indication to me. Jim's not going back.
Right.
He has a massive advantage over every coach right now in the NFL. The same advantage Pete had in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. He knows the next 5 years worth of players coming out of college football and who's good and who's not.
Yeah.
So his drafting is going to be good.
Yeah, no, Jim's coming back. And I think to your point with Jody and Pete and all this kind of stuff, it's kind of interesting too, because if Paul was around, yeah, but then I guess I give Jody a little slack too, because like when you had Russ still here, and there was still okay, so she's transitioning, Russ is here, you're sort of like now hearing the rumors of the drama starting. There's Russ one out. Is it Peter, Russ? So that what I mean? So that year it was like, okay, well, what's going on with Russ? And then we don't trade him and then he comes back. So Pete's still here. We're gonna keep that thing going. Like, let's keep it rolling. We're still the Russ and Pete show. And then when Russ finally forces himself out, it was like, is it Russ or Pete? And they chose, well, Russ wanted out, so you didn't have a choice. But Pete stays another year. We go 9-8. exceeding some expectations, really, and had a decent year. We had a building block, so he's gonna come back again. So to me, it was tough to kind of say, hey, Jody should have done it a few years ago because you had the Russ drama mixed into it. There was COVID, and then last year you can't fire him after last year, right? So
No.
it was interesting, and I think I give her all the credit in the world because she could have said, you know what? No, wait a second. We had a great year last year. Pete had a sort of a down year, but this is Pete Carroll, man. Like, no, and I'm not making this move. This guy's a legend. He had a great year. We don't have Russell Wilson. We're still building. We're going back, and we're gonna run this till his contract goes out, and then we'll figure it out. So for her to make the move, kind of probably listening to what's been going on out there, because a lot of people are saying, "Hey, man, it's time." Maybe
Well,
she's
even
listening to us, but I'm just saying that
yeah,
it's like,
no
no,
shit.
I'm just saying like there's enough echo that
Oh,
it's
for
like,
sure,
hey,
100%.
it's time. And so there definitely some of that came into play. Obviously, John was in that meeting. So,
Pete even alluded to it in his last interview with ESPN when he did his Pete
right.
Carroll show. He even alluded that outside voices, non-football voices, as he says,
Yeah.
contributed to him going.
It's got to be true, right? And so I give her credit that she could have easily not made the move. So I give her a lot of credit there, and it just shows, like Steezy was saying, that she's committed to winning here. And I don't know if it's for Paul, but that makes a lot of sense. Hey, let's get another one for my brother, but at the same time, maybe you know what? Maybe me as Jody Allen, maybe I like the Seattle Seahawks. Maybe I really enjoy being the owner of a pro football team here in Seattle.
Essentially a Fortune 500 company.
Totally. And you know what? I want to win here. I don't want to just sit here. I'm not just about making profits with ticket sales and TV deals. I want to win. I want to put a winning product just like Paul did. So I'm going to do what's best for Seattle. And here's my first big move. So, I give her all the credit in the world, man.
Well, here's the thing too, and this is what people I don't think understand about the sale of, and Steezy kind of alluded to it, but I don't think people know the whole backing of what this sale would mean. So I went and dug into it a little bit.
Mm,
If Vulcan sells the Seahawks,
right.
they don't profit. Jody doesn't get any money. It goes to charity.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in Paul's estate, inevitably when it is sold,
Right.
goes into charity.
That's right.
So you're not seeing a dime of it. So ultimately for her in this case, like I think it's more of what Steezy mentioned, which is I think she honestly wants to have her own legacy. Like I
There
took
you
over my
go.
brother's
There you go.
team.
Yeah.
I want my own legacy where Jody Allen was the owner that won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. So
Right.
think of that legacy in the Seattle area. The Allen family, Super Bowl champions,
Big
both
time.
Paul and Jody.
That's big.
It makes it a bigger deal. It makes it almost insurmountable. They become living, well, in Jody's case, a living legend at that point.
Yeah.
So,
Legends.
no, it'll be interesting. I will say this. I've got a feeling end of next week, mid to end of next week, Seattle's new head coach will be announced
Mm-hmm.
because I think we're going to see, depending on how this divisional round goes with some of these coaching options, Seattle they could keep pushing it a little bit, but then you've got, the weekend of the third, you've got Senior Bowl. So you'd like to have a coach in place if you're going to go scout at Senior Bowl. It's going to be interesting how long this takes Seattle to find a coach. I think with the amount of names they've thrown out, they're definitely going to do their due diligence, but it'll be interesting to see how this comes down when it starts heating up, when names start getting taken off that list by other teams.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be. I mean, they don't have a choice, right? You got the NFL moves fast, it moves quick, so you got to start making decisions and getting those interviews going. Like you said, there's already a board a list of guys that they're talking about, and I'm sure there's some guys that aren't on that list, right? So we'll see. And John's got a press conference coming up soon too, so that'll be interesting. But
That's tomorrow. That'll be
that's
interesting.
tomorrow, and yeah, man. So I look at this like Steezy. Yeah, I love having Steezy on, man. He's just like you said, he's just great to be on that different culture level with the team and kind of having that real nice insight with some of the guys and just kind of really know what's going on, almost like on the ground level, right? So I loved having him on today, man.
Yeah, I know it was awesome having Steezy back. And Guys, all I can say is we've got a lot of guests coming at you in this
Oh, yeah.
gauntlet. You're going to get a lot of content from us. We'll have Chris Clough back on, this week, guys. He's going to come do a pod with me and Armac and chop up the John Schneider press conference, which will happen tomorrow. So hopefully by the time you guys hear this, John will be out talking about what the future of the Hawks look like. But we have him coming on this Wednesday, and then we have Dana O'Gorman coming on Thursday as well. So
Yeah, that's gonna be
we got a lot of content coming your way, guys. So just everyone stay tuned, follow, subscribe, like, share, whatever you can do to help support the show so we can keep bringing you guys this great Hawks content.
Yeah, guys, man, we just appreciate everyone tuning in and listening. But yeah, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, man. It goes a long way for us because we love what we're doing and we just want to keep bringing this content, man. We're all about just having different opinions on the show from a lot of guests that really know their stuff, really know their football, and really know Seahawk football. So, that's going to be exciting. But you know what? Appreciate Steezy coming on again, guys. Go check him out. Steezy A Smith. You can find him on YouTube, Instagram. Like he's everywhere. Twitter. The guy's all over. He's bringing he just breaks down and brings you some awesome content. Like we said, from a different perspective. So honestly, go check his stuff and give him a follow, give him a like, and all that good stuff too. So we're gonna get out of here for tonight, man. That was an awesome episode with Steez, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.
Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.